Okay, hear me out on this one. Because I quite liked American Fiction, as did everybody. I thought it was fantastic. I came out of that movie theater on a high, thinking this could win Best Picture, Oscar, no problem. The acting was phenomenal. The story it's touching, but also laugh out loud funny, and also thought provoking. You know, it kind of hits on many levels, and works really well. So, like I said, I thought it could have won Best Picture Oscar. It did not, but it did win Best Adapted Screenplay Oscar, and I agree with that. You might think from my title that I'm here to make the argument that it should not have won that Oscar, but that's not the case. The screenwriter made some really tough choices. Anytime you're going to try to boil down a novel into and distill it into a 1.5 hour long movie, you're going to have to make some tough choices, and the screenwriter for American Fiction definitely did. And that being said, I still think Erasure is by far the superior of the two, and I'm going to make my case in this video, and I'm going to talk specifically about the section of Erasure that American Fiction leaves out, and I'm going to talk about the scene in that American Fiction adds to the story that is not in Erasure, and could have been and maybe should have been in Erasure. But those are what I see as the two most substantial differences. And hopefully by the end of the video, you are persuaded to go out and read Erasure. This is one of my top 10, top 20 favorite novels. I read it originally in 2005 and have been pushing it on friends and family since. Very few people take me up on it. I don't know why this is. Percival Everett is a fantastic writer, but has not been a household name. I think now with American Fiction, I've seen more profiles of him in in news media, magazines, online, that sort of thing, interviews, which he does not do many interviews. So like I said, I've been pushing this for a long time. People don't take me up on it, but I'm hoping that with between the movie and all the publicity, and maybe by the end of this video, if you haven't already read Erasure, maybe you will be at least tempted to go out and get it and check it out. So let's get into it. The main thing that American Fiction erases from Erasure is my pathology. This is the novel that Monk writes, partly out of frustration, out of rage, partly due to the financial pressures that are brought to bear. Now, I think that's not his initial intent, but obviously when the financial incentives are there, when the money is thrown at him, basically, it becomes a very different proposition for him. And that is true in the book and in the novel, but in the book and in the movie. But in the book, we get to read all of my pathology. It is this entire second quarter of the book. You can see here it is about 25,000 words, 10 chapters. Can you see that? And it's amazing. You're in the frame narrative, you're in Monk's story for the first quarter, and that's just as in the movie, with the struggles, the family struggles that he's going through, family and professional struggles that he's experiencing, frustration at finding his books misshelved in the bookstore, that sort of thing. And we get a little taste of my pathology when he sits down in his studio to write, and the characters kind of come out from his head, Van Gogh and Willie, and we see them. And it's a humorous scene. And they're questioning him. It's very meta. It's great. But we just get the littlest taste. Whereas in Erasure, we get to read the whole thing, and oh my God, it is hilarious. It is mind-blowing. It is such a different register from the very sort of refined literary frame narrative to then shift into Van Gogh's story from Van Gogh's point of view. And it is crude, it is crass, it is trashy, and trashy is kind of a complicated word, but let's let it stand for now. It is a very stereotypical like ghetto story, and it shifts into this register of just very short sentences, punchy prose, short words. There are barely any two-syllable words in the whole thing. It's a masterful change of register. And for the first couple chapters, I was just kind of like laughing, like this is so over the top, it's so ridiculous, it's hilarious. But by chapter 3 or 4, I'm actually starting to get invested in Van Gogh's world. And this is the trick of this book, is that you really get pulled into the story, into the world of Van Gogh, and you're really rooting for him. The odds are stacked against him. Crude as he is, chauvinistic as he is, like self-absorbed as he is, at the same time, the odds are so stacked against him societally, culturally, that you do kind of wind up rooting for him. At least that was my experience. And so that when that same soliloquy that we see in the movie, which is cobbled together from near the end of My Pathology in the book, it's not quite the same, but it's a lot of similar sentiments. In the movie, that just struck me as like a caricature. It's so over the top and on the nose that you're thinking, oh, like why would nobody's actually going to believe that? But in the book version, in the like once you're 8-9 chapters deep into My Pathology, it really works. I was totally with Van Gogh, to the point where I would even say that the novel loses a little bit of that energy. Like it is so high energy, that second quarter, My Pathology. When you shift back to the frame narrative, I feel like a little bit of that energy is lost. But the novel really does. That is when the money is offered, and now this isn't just a sort of an outburst of rage and frustration, but the potential to cash in on the popular appeal of that kind of book, imitative and exploitative as it is. So, and that's where that is the crux of both the book and the movie is, is this trash? Is this art? Is this acceptable to do this, to make art or make a commercial product based on the sufferings of others, mocking the sufferings of others, exploiting the sufferings of others? Is that acceptable for us? Clearly it is, because that sort of thing does happen. But that's really what Everett is getting at, I think, in Erasure. At least it's certainly one of the big themes. I mean, that is the main thing that's left out. It's a huge part of the reading experience, and it I think is what makes this a real tour de force. Okay, so let's talk about the scene that is included in American Fiction that is not present in Erasure, but that maybe could have been, maybe should have been. I really wish it would have been, because I would love to see how Everett would have handled that same scene. The scene I'm talking about comes near the end, and it is the scene where Monk and Centara Golden are in have their lunch together. They are both on the judge's panel, and Monk comes in and he is going to confront, or at least have a conversation with Centara Golden, the author of We Lives in the Ghetto. She's on the judge's panel, and that's what has brought them together. And this is what movies do so well, is if there's a protagonist, Monk, and an antagonist, Centara Golden, the movie's going to, by the end, bring them together and have them have a conflict, a conversation, a confrontation, butt heads. That's what movies do so well, and they're going to get them on the screen doing that, and interacting at least. And like I said, I wish, I would like to see how Everett would have handled that same scene. It's a good scene, and it's really good to add it. in the book, the author's name is Juanita Mae Jenkins, but she's just we just have her name. She's not a character. We don't see her on the page. She doesn't read from an excerpt from her book. She's not on the judges panel. So and this is where the screenwriter does a really good job of working her into the story in a very natural, believable way, so that by the end, that these two opposing forces can get together and debate, have a confrontation. My problem with the scene is that I feel like it pulls its punches, and Monk enters that confrontation so hesitantly, so timidly, so apologetically. He apologizes like 5 times just for like making noise, for taking up space, for existing, and I don't understand it. It's like you just spent hundreds of hours writing and producing a book that was negatively inspired by this woman's book, which you haven't even read. You admit you haven't even read, and you're just going to be so timid about it. And initially I'm thinking, oh, he's doing a Columbo, where he's going to be kind of stumbly bumbly at the outset, but by the end we're going to get those zingers. And we just don't. Like, she just is able to kind of deflect his criticisms, and he's projecting, right? He feels an incredible amount of guilt, feels like he's betraying himself as an artist, betraying his family and the education that they've given him, and possibly betraying his culture as well as an African-American man. So he's projecting a lot of that onto her, and she just kind of deflects all of any hint of criticism, saying, "Look, I'm just giving the publishers what they want, and I'm giving the reading audience what it wants. And what's wrong with that, right? What's so wrong with that? I'm doing this to make money, but also to, I've done some actual interviews. I'm writing about the downtrodden, and I shouldn't be criticized for doing that because lots of other writers have done that." Now, I would, just as a side note, I would have a bone to pick with the two writers, the two writers that she mentions. And she sort of says, would you have a problem with Bret Easton Ellis or Charles Bukowski writing about the downtrodden? And I'm thinking, Bret Easton Ellis, when has he ever done that? And Charles Bukowski was the downtrodden. Like, that's who he was. Could have picked some better examples, but regardless, we'll move on. But basically, she is saying, like, I write. She doesn't say I write what interests me. She says I write what interests people. She takes his argument, which is a political argument, and again, he's not making it well. He hasn't read her book, even though he's just read hundreds of, or at least 100 books to sit as a judge on this prize. He can't bring himself to read her book. How she doesn't get incensed by the fact that he hasn't read her book and is still, attacking her for it is beyond me also. But anyway, she takes his essentially political argument and turns it into a personal one when she says, it sounds like potential is what he talks about, the potential that he sees, and she says, and it's a good line, potential is what people see when they think that what's in front of them isn't good enough. And since we've seen him sort of doing that with the members of his family and with the woman, the neighbor that he started seeing, that he is sort of holding himself aloof and maybe a little bit in judgment on the people around him. So she turns his political criticism into a personal one, and it just kind of ends the conversation. And then the movie, basically, by having the final ending being Monk being driven off the lot in the passenger seat, clearly having taken the money for the book and the money for the movie rights, and it really the movie kind of confirms that attitude of hate the game, not the player. And I really wish that that we could see what Everett would do with that same scene, with that same confrontation. I think it would have been much more interesting. Monk says a line that I just can't imagine him saying. It is that potential line where he says, "I also see the unrealized potential of black people in this country." almost as though he's saying, like, I write in the way that I do to try to elevate black people, to show them another way to be that isn't being, constricted by the roles, the racial and cultural roles that are sort of that the broader society at large is trying to impose upon you, which is his objection to this book, which just seems to confirm and reinforce those very stereotypical, trashy roles. And but I don't think Monk would say that. And there's a quote from the book, which I'll put up on the screen, I think the Monk in the book certainly would not say that. He's just much more self-interested and self-absorbed than having broader thoughts, I think, about the culture. By the end, those broader thoughts are happening because he's been forced into a very uncomfortable situation, personally and professionally. But I don't buy that line coming from him in the movie. I think that the movie just doesn't, even though it goes further by having them talk with each other, it's not the confrontation that I think it could have been, which is why I really kind of wish that scene had been included in the book. Regardless, it's a phenomenal adaptation. I highly recommend both the movie and the book. So Erasure was published in 2001 in response to a very specific book from the 90s, and I would be interested to hear if you know what that book is, if you remember that book. Leave a guess or your answer in the comments below, and hit subscribe, and maybe even the notification bell. And I will talk about that book in my next video. And that will be out soon. Maybe it will even be up in one of these corners already if a bit of time has passed, but I'm hoping to get to that real soon. Links to the couple of books that I've written in the description below. Thanks for bearing with me to this point, and I will see you in that video.